Successful Escapes, number 10. Hello, I'm HG Tudor, and we turn to more examples of people who have successfully escaped utilizing my work. An opportunity for you to hear from other readers, viewers, clients of mine, and understand their experiences. First, we hear from Loki, from California, who talks about the ensnarement and entanglement that she had in relation to more than one individual.
Call me Loki. I'm from California. The background I have with narcissism is difficult to disentangle from the fabric of my family tapestry. Both of my parents have cluster B personality disorders. I had an antisocial narcissistic father, and I have a borderline bipolar 1 and codependent mother. Healthy dynamics were not modeled, let alone taught to me. Of course, this is going to reflect in many aspects of my life and the relationships I form. Love is simply one of the more devastating facets to learn such hard lessons through. The first boy I fell in love with was deeply strange, but so very charismatic and sweet when he wanted to be. We had a lot in common, particularly in how we were raised and in being the youngest siblings. The relationship was a rapid, turbulent, intermittently explosive mess. What else can you expect between two thoroughly traumatized, barely not children playing with matches and gasoline? I began researching at home while he was out at school. Yes, we lived together. I'm not going to go there. There was something I'd missed in his behavior. Quite a lot, really. This, to my perception at the time, wonderful young man had a bizarre dark side that I seemed perfectly calibrated to aggravate without meaning to in the slightest. If anything, the more I tried not to, the worse it seemed to set him off. He was cunning and calculated. Researching pathological lying tied many lines of this web together, which led me to narcsite.com, home base of our delightfully macabre, wickedly snarky, deliciously clever, and vastly knowledgeable HG Tudor. Before I knew it, he was home and I had to stop, but that pause didn't last long. The more I learned, the harder it was to be around him. This culminated in an awful nuclear meltdown of a breakup, and he immediately moved out of my apartment. It was less of a traditional escape and more of a banishment of him, as he wasn't on the lease. The ravenous need in me for information was unleashed, and I devoured as much of HG's prolific body of work as I could that summer. Not only did the boy fit so many of these narcissistic behaviors, so did my dad. Most jarring of all were the occasional posts on psychopathy through a narcissistic lens. I'd heard bits and pieces of the same basic principles of the same behaviors HG describes in himself in both of them. So much made sense, finally, though that sense is clouded by the delusory haze of their narcissism. A few years later on, the boy came back and confessed he'd been diagnosed with ASPD while we'd been apart. I was surprised he'd spoken with a psychologist at all, not at the diagnosis. I told him that Dad had killed himself. His reaction was to send a sad-faced emoji. Still, I let him back into my heart and my life. And again, things ended the same way, though with slightly less vitriol. He was a mid-range type A narcissist, though a very young one and not skilled enough with his manipulations quite yet. The next narcissist I'd fall in a charade of love with was much more skilled, unfortunately. I certainly escaped from in a more traditional sense once it finally sunk into my thick skull that he'd been telling on himself all along, and I'd been choosing not to believe him lest he attempt suicide after losing such a potent fuel source. Of course, I didn't quite realize that at the time, but hindsight, 2020, though it is 2023. So is hindsight technically 2023 then? I don't know. What I do know is that every time I leave the Tudor sphere, I'm caught by a progressively more capable narcissist. And it all ties back to that tumultuous, formative paternal relationship. I realize this isn't going to apply to everyone. Most people aren't going to have a narcissistic parent, let alone a pathologically antisocial parent. Still, there are more people like me out there than you may realize, listener. Maybe you're one of them too. The solution, I think, is simple. Don't leave the Tudor sphere, Keep your senses sharp. Train your emotional reflexes to become considered responses and be ready to give your empathy, whether felt or cognitive, a workout. It's not paranoia when you subconsciously attract or are attracted to such thoroughly destructive people. It's self-protection. Empathy without boundaries is self-destruction. I'm grateful for the opportunity to learn from the source of sources. Even when it's hard to do, it's worth it to listen carefully, to absorb these lessons and apply HG's teachings in your day-to-day life. Could really save you from enduring suffering that you don't have to. Thank you for listening. And thank you, HG in particular, for sharing your platform with your audience for a few moments.
There you have Loki's experience in relation to an intimate partner, which led her to my work, my prolific work, and all of the compliments that she provided about it, which also allowed her to find understanding in relation to her father. Now we turn to another escape. This comes from Emma in the United States, who's asked that I narrate her circumstances. Did I accidentally stumble across one of HG's YouTube videos? One could say that, but I don't believe in accidents. Here I was, desperately struggling to meet, fix, help, fill, as I had for my entire life, the emotional needs of my aging father. Did I know my father was a narcissist? No. I only knew the following. He was a black hole of need. No matter how much of myself I gave to him, no matter how much my long-suffering mother gave to him, nothing could fill him up. The insatiable black hole of need was always gaping. His demands upon my time and my emotions, his demand that I remain devoted to him and only him, never ceased. Two aphorisms applied to my life as a child and a teen. 1. I never knew if I was coming or going. 2. I could not win for losing. It had been that way since the day I was born. I was the family scapegoat. But at the same time, my father relied upon me for most of his emotional needs. My childhood was one of misery and abuse, physical, emotional, sexual. I was used as a pawn by my father, so he could gain control over others. But I never understood. I was hoodwinked, gaslighted, told I hadn't seen what I had seen, heard what I had heard, experienced what I had experienced. I had enough insight to understand there was something very wrong with my family, with my father, but I could not pinpoint what it was. I assumed I was the problem. Not only did I hear those words daily from my parents, most people in our community respected and admired my father. I did, however, leave home at the age of 17, and I never returned for more than a brief visit. I avoided my parents as much as possible. For better or worse, leaving home didn't end my relationship with narcissists. Narcissists were all I knew. One seeks out what is familiar. Abuse was familiar to me. The behavior of a narcissist living in a family controlled by a narcissist was what I knew. I had developed an addiction to narcissists. Almost all my romantic relationships have been with narcissists. I've escaped some dangerous, deadly situations. I did it on my own. My survival instincts are strong, and I am stubborn as hell, but despite the dangers I faced, the pull was always there. The roller coaster ride a narcissist provides is addictive. No one lifts you to sublime heights like a good narcissist. Nobody crushes you beneath their boot like a bad one. And sometimes, yes, it's the same narcissist. I'd no sooner leave one narcissist than I'd end up with another abusive man. Lest you think I'm stupid, I'm not, I'm smart. I do have 3 degrees that say so, but smart didn't matter a lick when it came to falling under the spell of a narcissist. In my mid-20s, I reached a low point. I was in fact brought so low, I had nowhere to go but up. I took stock of my life, avoided entanglements of any kind for 2 years. I ultimately married a good man, or, according to HG's evaluation, a normal. He's got just enough narcissistic traits to keep me hooked. However, nothing changed regarding my interaction with my father. He continued his intrusive attempts to control me. If anything, the fact of me marrying a normal, healthy man and then having a bunch of normal, healthy children threatened him and worsened our relationship. At least, I had the wherewithal to keep my children away from him. As my father aged and my siblings avoided him like the plague, his demands upon me became increasingly time-consuming, excessive, draining, and emotionally and physically exhausting. I found myself crying all the time. I began to experience panic attacks, something that hadn't happened since my teenage years. I was at my wit's end. There came a day when my father and I were involved in a discussion. He'd done something inappropriate, and I'd been asked to have a chat with him about his behaviour, his poor boundary recognition. Although I was polite and respectful, as was typical of him, he stared at me, his eyes filled with hate. I couldn't comprehend the hate. I had never been anything but kind. Suddenly, I had a vision, a disconcerting vision. I envisaged my father made of puzzle dirt, the cracked earth of a bare, dry field. If you try and lift a piece, it crumbles to dust in your hand. As I stood there as he stared at me, it was as if I watched piece after piece of puzzle dirt crumble and fall from my father's face. It was as if he was made of puzzle dirt, as if he was nothing but a mask. As you might imagine, the vision was terribly disturbing. Within a day or two, I stumbled upon HG. I was listening to a YouTube channel, a channel on politics, when one of HG's Harry's wife recordings popped into my feed. I've no interest in Harry's wife, but there was something about the title that caught my eye. It said something about narcissists. But more than that, the specific topic, which I can no longer remember, rang a bell, an alarm bell. I clicked on the video and listened in rapt attention. I swear my mouth dropped open. I was in shock. HG was discussing my father. I scrolled through all his material, listening to everything to do with a parental narcissist and a mid-range narcissist. I accessed the Knowledge Vault and downloaded information about the parental narcissist and again the mid-range narcissist. The next thing I did was complete HG's empath detector. I needed to know what I was. Perhaps I was the narcissist. Although I can't find my results, I know I'm a standard empath with some significant minority traits. I don't recall the cadra. I also submitted a trait detector and filled out a weaponized empath questionnaire. Shortly thereafter, I purchased and submitted a narc detector for my father. According to HG's evaluation, my father is, or was, an upper mid-range elite with a significant somatic influence. HG nailed my father. Everything clicked, all the pieces fell into place. All the answers I'd been seeking were right there in HG's evaluation. These were answers for which I'd been desperately searching, but I'd been searching in all the wrong places. I'd spent thousands of dollars on counselling, all for naught. Over and over, I'd been told to forgive and forget, to be the bigger person, to repent and seek reconciliation. It never worked. My father couldn't change. I'd been fighting the wrong battle, a battle I could never win. I needed to change my strategy. I took a deep breath, screwed up my courage, and arranged for a telephone consultation with HG. I was hesitant at first. I was afraid. I worried I'd be judged because my story is complicated and my life has at times been ugly. Yet I found I could confide in HG in a way I've never been able to confide in another soul. He didn't judge, nor did he pat me on the head and murmur, "Oh, you poor dear." He was professional and knowledgeable. He didn't make me do anything, but he offered suggestions as to what I could do to help myself, either via continued telephone conversations or via information in the knowledge vault, or both. He also recommended a couple of his books, Fuel and Pipelines, which seemed especially appropriate for my situation. I've continued to consult with HG for over 2 years. What does he provide? Knowledge, insight, support, consistency. HG taught me how to handle my narcissist father. While I couldn't institute a total no-contact regime because I oversaw my parents' finances and healthcare needs, I was able to go almost no contact. I limited our conversations to once a month, and when my father's behaviour became inappropriate, I either left his presence or hung up the phone. It wasn't easy. In any interaction with others, my heart tells me to be loving, forgiving and understanding, compassionate, and in my father's case, to be a good daughter. HG taught me to use my head. He taught me to think logically, to apply logic to each situation rather than emotion. Emotional thinking is a bad habit for an empath when it comes to the narcissist. With HG's encouragement, I got over the hump. There is a definite hump and a definite learning curve. Almost no contact became easier and easier, until it became a no-brainer. HG then helped me impose a strict, total no-contact regime with the other narcissists in my life. My addiction to narcissists is powerful, and it's complicated. I don't hate narcissists. I've never wanted to get even, nor do I want revenge. Put it bluntly, I just don't want the shit kicked out of me anymore, both figuratively and literally, and I want to protect my family. The truth is, I have no regrets. I've learned a great deal. The school of hard knocks and all that. But when it comes to my father, I wish I had found HG sooner. Thank you, HG. You have my heart and my undying gratitude. My advice to all of you struggling empaths out there, don't be afraid of HG. Contact him. He is the only person who provides effective help in dealing with a narcissist. HG may not believe in miracles, but I do. He is a miracle worker. To paraphrase C.S. Lewis, I know HG isn't safe, but for me, he's very good. And there we have the experiences of Emma, who was helped in relation particularly to her father by my work. If you want to share your experiences so others can learn from them, either send a video, audio file, or a written work for me to narrate to narcissist1909@gmail.com for consideration and inclusion in this series. I'm HG Tudor. Thank you for listening.